Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 55 of Lore Lords, which is pretty great, pretty amazing, pretty spectacular. And today we're talking about Warhammer, but not fantasy Warhammer, not this time. This time it's about the big one in space. That's right, Warhammer 40k, which I actually know a lot less about than fantasy Warhammer, basically because of Lore Lords and playing Total War. But I'm going to learn a lot about Warhammer 40k tonight. So
it's the big one.
Yeah, this is the one that everyone talks about and references usually. So
usually when people say Warhammer, this is what they're talking about.
Which is funny that I know the other one more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people actually do nowadays because of like the games. I guess more Total Warhammer is really big. There hasn't really
and Vermintide too.
Yeah, and Vermintide. Yeah, as well. That's the thing. So we just had Dark Tide come out, which is the first really high quality 40k game since Dawn of War, I would say, which is the game that got me into Warhammer in the first place.
I don't even know that game.
I don't even remember what it was. Something maybe like a graphics card or maybe even like a PC Gamer magazine back in the early 2000s. And I got a demo disc with it with 3 games on it, and one of them was Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War, and I had no idea what Warhammer was. I think I'd seen it in Games Workshops in the mall, and I knew the logo, but that was it. And It's a strategy game, Age of Empire style, early 3D strategy game era that was just really good. One of the best RTS games ever made, and I think that's a pretty agreed upon statement. Everyone loves Dawn of War. And the opening trailer shows orc smoking a cigar, a fantasy-looking orc smoking a cigar with a machine gun. And I was like, I love this. I'm ready. I'm ready for this world.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah,
that's funny. I was say, that's right up your alley. Is just an orc with a gun.
Yeah, I was just okay. Oh, what is this? And that's why it's my alley. Is because of that game, which is
that's funny.
Yeah,
made me think about demo discs too for a second.
Yeah,
I'm
dude.
Wow,
what an age! I remember when I was a kid, we'd get so many different ones because my dad really liked to buy flight sticks, different flight sticks and driving wheels, because that's the kind of games he liked to play. So they'd always come with these demo, and some of them weren't anything to do with flight sticks. It'd be I remember one of them had Alien vs Predator 2 on it, but it came with a Microsoft Flight Simulator flight stick.
Yeah,
but
I had one that I couldn't ever play because it had Resident Evil on it, and it was for a PlayStation, and my mom wouldn't let me get a PlayStation. So
you had a PlayStation disc without a PlayStation.
I had a lot of PlayStation demo discs actually, because I would subscribe to games, and my friends would not care about it. They were like, these are lame, I'm just gonna get the actual game, and I was like, I'll take them. Maybe I'll get a PlayStation. No, never happened. But I started at the PS2.
There's actually a very bad Warhammer 40,000 game for PlayStation 2 called Fire Warrior.
Never heard of it.
So
probably a good thing.
Yeah, it was a really rough, third-person shooter. First person, maybe? I don't know. It was bad. It was weird. Anyway, so today's episode, I'm not going to go into the real life back of it at all, because that's just even more to talk about. But there is, if you listen to the Warhammer Fantasy one, there is some major differences. I'm not doing it like a timeline with dates. I wrote it out like a story, because it's more, I searched myself around YouTube and other sites to look for an overarching, here's the history of Warhammer 40,000. Basically, that doesn't exist. No one really has made that before. It's way too long. It'll be a 6-hour video or a 60-part series of 20-minute videos. So I was I wanted to tell the story of Warhammer 40,000 from the beginning to where it is now, the 41st millennium, which we're not going to get to today. It will be a 2-part, just 2 though. Because I did want to talk a little bit about the early stuff to kind of give a good background of what this universe is. But as far as real life stuff goes, if you listen to the Warhammer Fantasy episode, it's the same story, same company. They just made it in the early 90s instead of the 80s. That's the only difference. And it's basically Warhammer Fantasy, but in space. And it's not the future of that world. It's an entirely own universe. So they're not connected.
Which I like. I like that personally. I think that's a good thing.
They're not the same. So, but they have the same. The orcs look the same. The elves look the same. The humans look the same. It's all the same thematically, but different, right? And let's just get into it. Let's get started.
Yeah.
With this. So this is part 1 of Warhammer 40,000, and I'm going to start off, like I said at the beginning, which I called part 1 Ancient History, because it takes place very, very far back. I'm not going to go too deep into the ancient stuff, but it's good to have an understanding to build the lore off of what's to come. And an important thing to note here is that a lot of this ancient lore is from codexes, which are the rule books of playing the different factions in the miniature game. And it's very old.
Oh, okay.
Very old lore. Some of it is not... None of this has been removed from the canon, but some of it has been tinkered with and changed, which suggests that it may not be 100% accurate and can be more considered like a myth than like true. You know what I mean?
Like Dragon Ball lore.
Kind of, yeah. Or like Zelda lore, how everything is just like ideas. That's what a lot of ancient history is in Warhammer 40,000. It's a lot of just like coming up with an idea of the context clues that we've had from various books and rule books that mention the time and like putting it together as best you can.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah.
So the Warhammer 40,000...
That's fun storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like... A lot of the lore of Warhammer comes from... If you get a rule book for like a faction, like say, for example, I play Chaos Space Marine, so I have the Chaos Space Marines Codex. It's probably like an 80-page book. 40 of those pages are rules of the game and how to play it and how to use your army. The other 40 is lore. Just that's about like what everything is and how it does, and stories too. And that's kind of like that's how you put it together. Similar to like Zelda,
like, oh, here's what you're playing,
where you're kind of like having to piece things together. And of course, there is a ton of books that flat out tell stories and lore and stuff like that too. And some of them are very good, actually, like legitimately good books too. But this ancient history thing generally comes from 2 books. One's called The Lost and the Damned, and one is and the rest are just a bunch of different codexes, specifically Necrons from like the 3rd edition codex. So that's like 2000, late 90s maybe. So it's pretty old. Okay. But to understand first, it's our same universe. The Warhammer 40,000 galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy.
Neat.
So it's our galaxy, and it started the same way as ours did, with a big bang. There was the same exact thing. So if you understand the Big Bang, you understand how life started in Warhammer 40,000.
Gigantic orgy.
Yeah, huge orgy of stars got together and just popped,
exploded
into what we have now. Yeah, and very soon after that, the very first life was created, and that was a race known as star vampires. Now,
oh wow,
yeah,
huh? So that's the first one. Huh?
The first one is these things called star vampires. What they're known as. They're kind of like formless, kind of like energy creatures that just kind of exist in space.
That's kind of dope.
They're like massive celestial energy entities. They don't have like a name, really. They're like intelligent, but they don't like speak, right? So people just named them star vampires for reasons. They eat stars. That's how they survive.
Okay, so they're very large.
Yes,
then,
they are massive creatures. And in
celestial, right?
Yeah. So in doing so, they end thousands of solar systems from even forming. Back then. And when they find forming planets, they don't care. They completely disregard planets. Like it's below them.
Well, if they're that big, then they're just kind of like bubbles to you.
Yeah, exactly. They're nothing. They don't care about these rocks or anyone on them. They're just going to eat the star and they move on to their next star. But they move very slowly because they don't move fast. So it takes thousands of years to get across for them. Like they go from one star and that's enough energy to get to the next star, basically.
What an existence.
Yeah, but they are intelligent, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. But after that, the Old Ones appeared. That's all that we know them as. They're just called the Old Ones. This race has never fully been shown, but we do know from some old art that they have that it is, in fact, the equivalent to fantasy's lizard men.
Oh, okay.
If you remember, they were also the first race.
Yes,
in
and
Warhammer
they were very
Fantasy.
intelligent
Yeah,
and stuff.
and the same thing. Their race is called the Slann. Same name, the frog people from Fantasy. Now, the image we have of the Slann in 40k old ones don't look like that. They look more like the normal lizard men, not frog people. But same idea. Old lizard people living in space, and they were the first spacefaring species. And the biggest thing they really did was they learned how to create dimensions, pocket dimensions.
Wow, wait, isn't that exactly what the lizard people did too? They learned how to teleport or something
Yeah,
like that?
so in Warhammer Fantasy, they learned how to teleport across the world, right? So in 40k, they created a thing known as the Webway, which is
that's awesome.
Pretty big today. It's still a big thing in the lore, and what it is it's like a network of pocket dimensions, and you can go in the Webway and just make your own dimension, basically, if you know how, and just live there. Like, you can just live in the Webway, and it's cut off of reality, and you can basically control it so no one can come to you. It's like the safest place in the entire Warhammer 40,000 galaxy, and basically no one knows how to get there.
Oh, that's a shame. I was about to say, why would anybody live in that universe after hearing about how miserable it is? Just like, go to a pocket dimension. Fuck it.
Yeah, some people
bring
do.
Your friends,
some
form it yourself.
There's a group of people
that's the happy ending.
Yeah, there's a group of people we'll talk about that do use the Webway actively, but there's only really one or two. So yeah, this was the first ever example in the lore of anyone knowing how to manipulate dimensions. And what you can do with the Webway is travel across the entire galaxy in a single step. So you can basically open a Webway on your world and then find another world and open it there, one step through, and you're there. So this was the alternate to what they already discovered, which was the alternate version of traveling through the galaxy would be called warp travel. Warp travel in Warhammer 40,000 is extremely dangerous. Which we're going to get into in a little bit, but not now. So they decided Webway travel is a lot easier. So they did that. It was safer. It was much better off, and they were able to spread across the entire galaxy that way. They found a ton of different races, and they would seed life to grow on planets. For example, Earth was a rock they found, and they're like, let's throw some life on there. So they put the protein there, basically, for us.
Neat.
That's all they did. They just kind of let it go. But there was another species they discovered, and that is a species called the Necrontyr.
Ooh, that's a cool name.
And yes, the Necrontyr, think space Egyptians. They appear. Their fantasy equivalent is the Tomb Kings, which we talked about. The Necrontyr appeared soon after the old ones, and unfortunately for them, they evolved on a world that was barely capable of sustaining life. And this was due to it being too close to the sun. So basically, their race had an extremely short lifespan due to cancer. It was inevitable that you would get horrific cancers because of solar radiation.
Man, what an existence.
Yeah, so they lived.
Life finds a way.
They lived to be about 35. Like that was their max age limit because you would get these horrible cancers. So what that did was it caused their short lifespan caused their species to be very productive, very good. They did as much as they could with their short lifespans, similar like the Solarians in Mass Effect. Like they were they were geniuses. They were super smart. They focused on that, but their biggest mission for their whole species was to extend their lifespan. And they would soon become spacefaring, and they would colonize other worlds, but even if you're born in the other world, your species is still adapted to only living 35 years, so it didn't solve the problem like they hoped it would. They would still die on safer worlds at young ages just because their species is built that way now.
Right. I mean, further evolution can happen, you'd think.
Yeah. So they worked on science and a bunch of other ways to do that, but they started colonizing a huge part of the galaxy. But it soon fell into strife with a massive civil war called the First War of Secession, which basically tore their empire apart. And they were killing each other, seeing who's, it was a civil war basically, but I think it was like 3 different factions, like political parties, right? But then they all were able to get together and team up when they found the old ones. Because they found this race found them, the old ones. They're like, oh, look, space people. Hey, dudes, what's up? We're lizards. And they're like, oh, you guys are way more advanced and you're like growing life. Can you help us extend our life? And they were like, no. So the Necrontyr said, okay, we're going to kill you all. So
that's a bit of a jump.
So the Necrontyr just started fighting the old ones, but unfortunately for them, as you might imagine, they were no match for the might of the old ones.
Yeah.
And they got their ass handed to them, and the old ones exiled them to the corner of the galaxy where they were originally from. They stopped a lot of their they basically kicked them out of their colonized worlds and said, "Go back to your corner. You guys aren't ready yet for this. Like, you're not mature enough for space," basically. So they had a small couple systems they lived in. But that just made them even angrier. And it turns out one of the reasons why during this whole species evolution the sun was so volatile, it was being consumed by a star vampire.
Oh, well, that explains
So they discover this, right? And the Necrontyr say, "Hey, that's a massive celestial being that could eat stars for shits and giggles. What if we tamed it and put it in a body?" So they did just that, and they created what is known as the Satan, which is the official name basically for that race of star vampires now. And they were able to, using magic and technology, they made a body for it, and it got named the Nightbringer, and it was the first Satan.
That's pretty dope.
So they basically...
it's scary.
If you look him up, he looks like a Grim Reaper. He was the first ever Satan. They now have this god power weapon avatar thing on their side, and then they start finding other star vampires and doing the same thing to them.
Oh, God.
And there was a side effect to this, which the Necrons didn't expect, and the Satan didn't expect either. And that was that the Satan kind of liked it. And the reason why they kind of liked it is because they found something tastier than stars in this process. And that would be souls.
Oh, well, why didn't I guess that? It's classic.
So, yeah, side effect is they want to eat you, but they'll fight for you if you just feed them souls. So, eventually, they started using these Satan to, like, push back against the old ones a bit, and the old ones were like, whoa, that's a lot, so let's just back off. But they were still able to defeat the Necrontyr in, like, straight-up combat, right?
Right.
So one Satan, who was named the Deceiver, so you can tell this is going
Lyle?
This is going somewhere good. Not Lyle. Maybe Belial, the god of lies, but not quite. The Deceiver was a Satan who told all the Necrontyr, "Hey, let's get together, because I have magic powers. I'm like a god. I can make you guys immortal. Like, I have that ability. And then you guys can become like we can take out the old ones." And they're like, "Dude, that's rad. Let's go." As you might have assumed by his name, this is in fact a lie. And what he did was he consumed all the Necron souls, leaving out only the leaders and the nobility.
Wow. Of course the rich fucking get richer.
And yeah. So what he did was he put all of their souls into metallic bodies, automaton bodies, and the race now became known as the Necrons.
God damn.
And so these were soulless metal skeleton warriors, basically, that were impossible to kill because they just get back up again, and they're almost indestructible. So they're immortal, all right. Yeah, and he did give him immortality, but there was no one there really to do it, except some of the leaders. The leaders and the higher class people got to keep their minds, but they still are put in the metal bodies.
Oh, okay.
So they're immortal too, but that's this is the birth of the Necrons, which is a major Warhammer 40,000 faction. And at this point, this is very bad for the galaxy, and this would start what was known as the God War, or the War in Heaven. The old ones were now getting absolutely slaughtered, left and right, by the Necrons and the Satan. The Satan would lead their servants to dominate the entire galaxy, planet by planet. They would find a ton of younger races, but they would treat them like cattle and use them to build massive tomb worlds for their masters. The galaxy at this point, like when this was happening, was basically covered in life, like potential life, and they basically snuffed it all out. Like there was almost nothing left.
Why the fucking dickheads?
And they just made giant tomb worlds, and they worked these people to death, and when they were done, they killed them all. And the Satan ate their souls.
Yeah, well, that sounds great.
Yeah.
It's exciting. It's
a great time for the galaxy at this point. And this is all like predating. So this is so far back, we don't even know when this is. So eventually the Deceiver decided that souls weren't good enough for him anymore, like normal mortal souls. He wanted to start eating Satan souls.
Oh.
So he tricked the rest of the Satan into killing each other and eating each other. And what that did was give the Old Ones the ability to finally start to fight back and move around. And during this time, the Old Ones discovered a race known as the Eldari, or the Eldar. And they would teach them how to access dangerous energies of the warp for powerful psychic magic. Eldar are high elves in Warhammer 40,000.
Oh.
So now the Old Ones have an army of elves, and they taught them how to use psychic powers. And the Satan were extremely vulnerable to the warp. Anything that came from there, which is where magic comes from, basically obliterated them. And this began to turn the tides of the war in the favor of the Old Ones. But that just made it get a lot worse for everything.
Okay, great. That's literally going to be said probably a lot.
Things are just going to keep getting worse.
It gets worse.
This is actually when we get our first date. We're now in 65 million BCE.
Okay, wow.
And the use of warp magic starts to open up Pandora's box. Now, what this means is warp entities, creatures just made of eyes and mouths and tentacles, just start showing up and manifesting in reality from overuse of warp magic, and they begin to consume the Psykers, which are the warp magic users.
Okay.
So, trying to defend their last homes, the Old Ones created a race known as the Krorks. These were massive green hulking behemoths that stood about 16 feet tall. They were powered by the warp, and they were used to stop warp creatures. They were basically made to battle warp entities like this that were showing up. But in the end, it was too little too late, as the warp species known as the Enslavers arrived. And these basically, they kind of look like Reapers a little bit, but like with flesh bags in the back. And they showed up in like locust-like size swarms, and each one of them was extremely powerful. And they basically, on their own, in a couple weeks, destroy the Old Ones from existence.
So, yeah, they're just like the Reapers.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's where they got the idea from the Reapers.
Maybe. So it's called the Enslaver Plague, is what it's known as. And this gave the Necrons a chance to rise up against the Satan with their new leader known as Sarek the Silent King. And he succeeded in defeating the Satan and enslaving them.
So he enslaved...
The Necrons now enslave the Satan instead of the Satan enslaving the Necrons. They switched roles. But the Necrons were now extremely weakened after non-stop wars. Like, they were literally falling apart, because remember, they're like mechanical, and they've been fighting for millions of years. And with the rise of Krorks and Eldars in the system, the Silent King decided to put his entire race into dormancy.
Oh, shit.
On Tomb Worlds. So they're literally underground cities in these massive worlds that are covered entirely in the Necron tombs, and the Necrons would go down there and go into stasis and start repairing themselves for millennia. Now, while this happened, the Silent King himself decided he was going to go to dark space between the realities, between galaxies, I guess, and exile himself to let the galaxy kind of grow on its own.
That's not a bad idea, I guess.
Yeah.
Depending on what he wants to do when he comes back, I guess.
I wouldn't call the Silent King a good guy, but his miniature just came out a couple years ago, and it looks awesome. So, because he's back now. That's like the latest big development as he came back. So even with the Satan and the Necrons gone, the Enslaver Plague had all but wiped out the Old Ones due to their overuse of warp magic. And the more warp magic you use, the more Enslavers show up. So it became a very, very bad time. And they were scattered and destroyed, but some of the Slann fled into the Webway, leaving the galaxy's fate to their younger races and the worlds they seeded with life. So they're potentially still out there, but if so, they've never been found. It's likely they're living somewhere in the Webway that no one has access to, until Games Workshop wants to make a new faction of lizard people in space. The Eldar will be the ones to take over the mantles of rulers of the galaxy, and their empire would start to span basically all over. And during this time, many seeded Old Ones' worlds would begin to slowly evolve on their own, and one of which was visited by the Eldar, and they found what they referred to as comical tree beasts. And they decided to spare them Now, why the Eldar spared them is unknown. Some believe it is because they thought that life was so rare in the galaxy that that it was precious, and we need to let it be safe. Others thought the silly monkeys in trees throwing rocks at elephants was funny, so they just let them go. This may have been the single greatest mistake ever made.
Is that Earth?
That would be Earth. So during this time, the Krorks would also start to rapidly devolve without the old ones around and become what is today known as orcs.
Oh.
They got a lot smaller, but still large by our standards, and they're a type of fungus known as the orcoid fungus, which travels with the race, constantly spreading spores, which allows orcs to rapidly grow their numbers and colonize new worlds as they reproduce just by fighting and moving around.
Nice.
Adult orcs shed spores constantly and over any and everywhere, and they basically can attach to a dead planet, a living planet, doesn't matter, they'll start to grow, which causes a problem because you'll kill all the orcs, and then a couple hundred years later, these spores grow into more orcs.
What an interesting way of reproducing.
Yeah.
Just basically sweat.
Yeah.
Go sweat.
They're 50% fungus, 50% mammalian, but they reproduce in the fungus side of the scale. They also never stop physically growing, which is unique to most species, and this combined with their ability to rapidly reproduce made them basically the greatest threat in the entire galaxy, and the Eldar spent most of their time just killing orcs as best as they could.
Wow, that's literally just sounds like a gardener chopping weeds and stuff.
Kinda,
yeah. They're gonna come back, but when they do, we'll just send out the team again.
Soon enough after that, comical tree beasts on that lone life-filled planet on the fringes of the galaxy would soon evolve into Homo sapiens. But it turns out this isn't a normal race, and has quite a few odd little genes in their gene pool. This is actually possibly due to the fact that Necrons found Earth as well during the protein stage and fucked with it a little bit. Because humans have a chance, 1 in a billion, to give birth to a human known as an untouchable or a null. And this is a type of creature that is extremely dangerous as they don't exist in the warp. So now I'm going to talk about the warp for a little bit so we can understand what this is. It's like the alternate reality, like the mirror Earth, right? Like that's basically what the warp is, except it's entirely made out of emotion.
Oh God!
So
that sounds like
it's
the beginnings of chaos.
It's a reality of like liquid basically. It's like kind of like dense, like there's like instead of open space, it's kind of like liquidy. And everything in there is all based on emotions, and every living creature in reality or real space exists as well in the warp as like an emotional shadow of yourself. It's not like a living entity, but it's like there. Right. Like so when you, for example, like murder someone, that emotion causes a tang in the warp. Like it'll cause like a quake, like a small localized quake in the warp, with just like emotional spike. And that is how psychic powers work. That is how a lot of things in this magic reality work. So if you are an untouchable or a null and don't have a warp self, you are one of the most dangerous and unpredictable things in existence, because you're basically immune to all forms of magic. You're immune to all forms of psychic. You basically can't be tracked with technology or psychic powers.
Wow.
And that'll come up in the next episode, but I just want to bring that up now. Okay. That's a dangerous thing that happens. The other more important thing we're going to talk about is that humans also have an offshoot race that began to appear called the Perpetuals. These look exactly the same as people, except they're immortal and seemingly impossible to kill.
Oh, wow, okay.
You cut their head off, it grows another body. You cut their head, you blow their head into smithereens, the body grows a head. You disintegrate them, they reform out of their ashes. You spread their ashes around, one little ash flake will grow back into a person. They're like...
It's like Majin Buu.
Yes. They're literally like impossible to get rid of. And they start to be born around the time 60 million and 29 million BCE. Somewhere between that gap range, the first Perpetual started showing up. The year 15,000 BCE is the estimated birth of the oldest known Perpetual. So, Stone Age, basically, that kind of time.
Right.
The next major event hits much later in 8000 BCE with the birth of a perpetual human known as Neoth, or commonly known now as the Emperor of Mankind.
Oh, wow. Is he still the emperor?
We'll talk about that this episode. So he claims to have been born on the banks of the Sakarya River, where his father was murdered by his own brother.
Oh.
So likely that is, yeah. What are you going to say?
I was about to say, but he can't die, right? That's the whole thing.
Well, the emperor can't. Emperor is perpetual. Neoth is perpetual.
his
Parents were not.
Parents were not.
No.
Okay.
So
perpetual is kind of just like a mutant.
It's a mutant
type
base.
thing.
Yes, 100%. It's like a weird offshoot race that gets like one in a couple, billion chance to be born. So
Sure.
his father was killed by his brother, which if you kind of connect that to biblical things, it's Cain and Abel.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
And he got mad, and he was young at this point, but he not knowing really what he was, he obliterated his uncle into dust with psychic powers in revenge.
Sick.
So
I mean, it's tragedy.
Yeah, it's tragedy. So except his uncle murdered his dad, but so he then proceeded to leave for the cradle of civilization, like Mesopotamia, determined to bring law and rule to humanity because of that event with his dad being like unpunished.
Good luck with that,
murdered.
bub.
So
We'll
see.
Oh yeah,
We'll see how that goes.
Good luck with that.
Around the same time, maybe connected to the birth of the emperor, around the same time there was a great quake in the warp. That reality that sits next to ours that we talked about, where 3 entities started to gestate under the names of Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle.
Oh damn.
So, of course, if you know Warhammer and you know fantasy and all this stuff, you also know these are 3 of the Chaos Gods, and they started to basically exist and psychically influence many people throughout the entire galaxy, specifically Earth. So Earth...
Humans are impressionable.
Humans are impressionable, and they were pretty targeted, and at this time, we're still in 8000 BCE, so we're like Gilgamesh era, which
Right.
Gilgamesh is the emperor, kind of. The Earth begins to see the rise of chaos cults.
Oh.
This period is known as the Age of Terra, with the Emperor trying to lead man as best he could, but he basically lets us do our own thing while taking on different roles throughout history, like as different leaders and people to like kind of push us in the right direction. But he doesn't want to like hold the reins. He wants people to have free will.
Right.
So he's like, you guys just kind of do your own thing, but I'm kind of like, if you guys start to go bad, I'm gonna start to go good. Like one example is like he kind of probably it's thought that he had a lot to do with stopping the Nazis. Like he kind of like saw that starting as like, let's not do this.
So that went a little too far.
Yeah. But there is one event even before that we know he took part in, and that would be during the 11th or 12th century, known as M2 on the imperial calendar, which we're going to be using from now on, basically.
Oh boy.
The second millennium, just M2. On the imperial calendar, he appeared as a lone warrior knight, donning golden armor and a scarlet-plumed helmet, and fought a dragon in the deserts. It's described as being a half-crawling beast with talons like scythe blades and a half-loathsome bird. With a scarred head and being over 20 meters long. His tail was 20 meters long alone.
Oh, okay.
So the Emperor killed this beast, but he was unable to fully destroy it. And sometime between the second millennium and the 25th millennium, the Emps, good old Emps, would take this corpse to Mars and store it there. We don't know 100% still what this creature is. It is known as the Void Dragon or the Dragon of Mars. We are 99.9% sure it is in fact a Satan from the God War that got wounded and landed on Earth.
And then and then the Emperor had to fight him.
Yeah, the Emperor killed it enough and put it on Mars. So our history we know today unfolds as normal after this. The only thing to note is that the Chaos Gods, Nurgle, Khorne, and Tzeentch, are fully born during the medieval period and get full consciousness, and they begin to think on their own and scheme and stuff. During the third millennium, so the year like 3000 beyond us, humanity made great strides in technology, and they began to learn about this thing called the warp. And they're kind of starting to tap into it a little bit. In the year 100 of the third millennium, Mars begins to be terraformed.
Cool.
And this is likely the time the Emperor brought the Void Dragon's body there. Because people were starting to like do things on Mars. They kind of stash it away. So now we're going into part 2. We're out of the ancient history, and we're going into the beginning of real Warhammer lore. And this is the Dark Era of Technology. Or Dark Age of Technology, or just the Age of Technology, which spans from the Millennia 15 to Millennia 25.
Okay.
This would be when humanity reached its zenith. We had technological marvels that no one had seen and no one has seen since. Humanity began to spread beyond the Sol system, establishing far-out colonies as worlds to farm resources from, such as food and metal. The problem was that they were so far away that it would take generations to even reach these established worlds.
Oh, wow.
So when a scout ship discovered a suitable world, they would send a gigantic sublight spacecraft to settle them, known as Long March fleets. And they would have thousands of settlers on them and travel for around 100 years before being able to land. So like a whole...
Imagine just being in that middle generation.
Yeah.
Like you were born on the ship and you died on the ship.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, there's a whole generation of people that never even got to like know Earth or the generation, basically, or the destination.
Yeah.
So...
Oof, what a life.
Yeah. When they would land, the ships would be cannibalized for parts to start the first settlement. And there was no hope to ever return to Earth from these worlds for the colonists. But many of these people never even knew Earth, like we mentioned. Like there maybe even 100-year-old dude or something. You know what I mean? Like it's possible. Like a baby was born on Earth, or like they were like 110 or something.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of these worlds were extremely dangerous via vicious predators, native alien races who would fight humans because they were invaders, or even extreme weather and unbreathable atmospheres was a problem as well.
Wow, that's a bummer. Imagine just like landing there after all that time and being like, "Oh, I can't breathe."
Yeah, so they were foreseen. This was a foreseen thing. So they would have domes ready for those kind of plants they could live in, right?
Sure.
And something that was good that the humans foresaw, was something they created something called the STCs, or the Standard Template Construct Database. These are fabrication facilities that could basically be part of the ship, that when they would land, they could basically fabricate anything from them that the Empire had.
Oh, cool.
And one such thing was large bipedal exo-armors that were heavily armored and armed with military-grade heavy weapons to fight native races, as well as mine resources, like blast open mountains with giant cannons, or they would have giant arms that would be chain swords that would be used to cut down forests. So that's why that exists in this world. Because they were they were used to cut down forests. So these things would be anywhere from like, I don't know, like 20 feet tall to like 100 feet tall. They were many different types of them. They were very large things. These towering armored mechs would be invaluable and easily conquer planets of any native races or natural predators. And then they would start to tower over cities as they were built, guarding them as they kind of rose up, and they would become known as knights to the settlers, after the legendary Terran warriors of myths that they would talk about. Pilots of knights was no easy job, because you'd have to be hooked into a machine by mental interface. And over the courses of a few generations, these elite warriors would develop societies known as knight houses. Knights eventually became leaders of their societies and would relegate their original purpose, such as, killing animals or gathering resources, to lesser ranks or squires even, as they were now considered the noble classes, and they would swear to protect their subjects, aka the colonists, and make order out of these primeval worlds that they lived on, and they would prove to be extremely successful.
Is this like serfdom, kind of?
Basically, yes, 100%. But they did soon become a vital part of human society during the Age of Technology, because soon after, a new invention changed everything, called the warp drive. These massive engines allowed ship known as Voidcraft to leave real space for a time and enter the dimension of the warp, and could turn a 100-year journey into a few days.
Wow, that must have been nice.
The warp is not a fun place to go.
Okay.
It's liquidy. We've talked about 3 dudes who live there.
Right.
So you don't really want to be there. But yeah, it's basically like this giant, dense, liquid reality. But there's some things that kind of may poke out at you from time to time. There's no stars, or no light, or no life. But it generally wasn't that scary or dangerous at this time. And ships would be able to go inside and follow what are known as eddies or warp currents to reach a destination and exit the dimension somewhere extremely far away from their entry point, because space and time just works differently in the warp.
Right.
So short jumps of around 4 light years were all that was possible at a time, and then they would just go again. They keep doing 4 and 4 and 4. Basically just out of dangers of being lost in the warp, because it was so hard to navigate. But soon a solution was found. Around the 22nd millennium, we saw the birth of the first human mutant species, known as navigators. These were extremely powerful humans who were natural-born psychers, able to tap into the warp naturally, and that let them able to pilot voidcraft and make extremely long and accurate jumps.
So they probably came from all the people using the warp for years and years and years.
Yes.
Eventually humans adapted to it.
Yeah, that is exactly basically what it is. And these people would become known as psychers.
Ooh.
For the first time, humanity was now linked across the stars and able to work on a normal timescale. Interstellar commerce and communication became possible, and many humans would join into political and economic partnerships with other planets. During this era, humanity was eventually united under some form of government, but that data is entirely lost to us. What we do know is that a group known as the Men of Gold, which is likely believed to be the politicians and the upper class people, relied on the works of a group known as the Men of Stone to create a almost fantastically utopian interstellar society. There was basically no war, and there was basically no spirituality. All people cared about at this point was scientific advancement and just doing that.
Classism?
Yeah, classism, but people were allegedly happy with it. Like, you were fine. Like,
Allegedly,
you all lived a good life at this point. Like, even if you were a worker, you didn't have to worry about money, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, you just had to do your time.
So if you existed in Warhammer as a human, this is hopefully the time to live.
This is the time you want to live. You want to be a stone man or a gold man. You could basically live a normal life. It sounds like the stone man, like you would clock a 9 to 5 at a factory or an office and then just go home, but you could do whatever you wanted if you had enough money to do whatever you wanted.
Well, okay. That sounds like working class conditions are good.
Yeah, working class conditions that just works on its own, but we don't know all the details. But the stone man's life was about to get a lot better even more, because they invented a third group of caste society, the Men of Iron.
Oh.
But these weren't men at all. They were artificial intelligence that they put inside robots or thinking machines that could be, with learning AI, used to assist them in anything from labor to military duty. So this was the end of humanity at this point.
Yeah, AI will do it.
Because the Men of Iron rebelled.
Yeah, I had a feeling that would happen.
They rebelled against their human creators and started a massive cataclysmic event remembered only as the Cybernetic Revolt. Remember, Warhammer 40,000 is called 40,000 because it's the 40,000th millennium. We're only at millennium like 22 right now in the time scale.
Right.
So this is still this is super ancient compared to where it is currently.
This gets way worse.
So both sides during this would unleash horrific weapons on each other. 2 great examples is one called the Mechanivores, which were thinking machines that were so big they could lift up continents and absorb space-time as a form of data.
Huh.
Another example is the Blackstone Fortress. These were massive, basically Death Stars.
Oh, okay.
They were just giant space cannons that the Empire, the humans would use to nuke AI planets. But this war would...
Gotta do what you gotta do.
This would eventually end. The war would end by the Alliance of Galactic Powers, which purged from the records, of course, but believed to not really be human. It's believed that the Eldar stepped in and said, stop it, and helped out the humans beat the AI. But it was at a terrible cost. The damage to human society was catastrophic, and their economic and political unity was shattered. The fear and revulsion of AI, what is now stood for as abominable intelligence, to this day in the universe, made it banned and seen as the worst thing ever to exist, which this led to the development of the first servitors, which are mindless cybernetic drones using human bodies as computer interfaces and their minds instead of a computer.
That's dark.
And they were made out of either condemned criminals or lobotomized vat-grown humanoids.
Oh my God. Yeah, we're getting dark now. Wow, things really fucked up. Man, that AI war really changed things.
Yeah, it did. So basically, they turned people into computers, and they served as a replacement for the Men of Iron.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But don't worry, it gets worse as we go into Part 3, the Age of Strife. From the 25th millennium to the 30th millennium, we had the Age of Strife. The STCs you mentioned earlier, the computer database of schematics for everything, had been perfected by human scientists and engineers at this time, which allowed for unprecedented expansion of humanity throughout the stars. Humanity would never reach this peak again, and the cybernetic revolution, though many humans were annihilated or simply left in shambles, having to start over, so a lot of planets went back to almost medieval-style living due to losing all their technology and being afraid of technology.
Right.
But this was only the beginning of mankind's descent into misfortune. Because during the Dark Age of technology, the Eldari Empire began its decline. The species had become so advanced that they fell into decadence and hedonism on a grand scale. The warp, which we have mentioned before, is a shadow of our reality made of emotion, right? So, like we talked about before, you do a murder, the warp reacts. Spiritual corruption of the entire Eldar race, which at this time was the most populous race in the galaxy, was causing so much commotion in the warp. Something very, very bad happened. Basically, during the biggest orgy of all time, a massive ball of hedonistic emotion would form as a new potent scientific energy, birthing the fourth chaos god, Slaanesh.
Wow, so things were so good for the elves that they just fucked like crazy and made a demon.
Yeah, they made not just any demon, the strongest of all demons, the Warhammer 40,000, as soon as he was born, all Eldari present were immediately killed, having their souls consumed by Slaanesh.
Jesus Christ.
This also caused a massive permanent warp rift at the site of his birth in the galaxy known as the Eye of Terror to form. This is basically a hole in reality that's just there, where the warp leaks out into our space.
Great.
And this is also where all core Eldari worlds were, and they were transformed into hellscapes known as Crone worlds today. For thousands of years, the Eldar seers warned others to stop acting this way because they saw this happening, and those who listened had fled Eldar society or moved into massive planet-sized ships known as craft worlds. Eldar also had their own gods, who were real and existed in the warp, but they were good emotion gods. And then Slaanesh was born and ate them all, which made Slaanesh even more powerful. And their last god, a name you might remember or recognize, called Cain, who was the god of war, tried to fight Slaanesh, but even he failed and was exiled as he was physically thrown out of the Eye of Terror into the mortal realm and shattered into billions of pieces.
That's a shame.
His pieces now rest as the engines of these craft worlds, and they go through what's known as the Infinity Circuit, which allows Eldar to transform themselves temporarily into Cain, known as the Avatars of Cain.
Oh, I remember you mentioned those guys before.
So, yeah, some Eldar decided they didn't want to be good, even after all this happened, and they would become known as the Drukhari, or the Dark Eldar, to outsiders. And they decided to flee the scene of the crime by entering the Webway into their own private dimension and creating a city known as Komorog, or the Dark Dimension, where they live to this day as their capital city.
Do we get a Malekith in this version too?
Basically, there's a couple different characters, but we're not going to talk about them right now. That'll be its own episode. But what they do, basically, in their existence is they are the most sadistic creatures in the galaxy, and they leave the Webway to hunt living creatures, basically, for sport, and they fuck them to death or just kill them outright. Wear their skins. They keep a lot of humans and elves as slaves. And
Christ.
They torment them for pleasure, and they have to do this because if they don't, their corrupted souls become visible and immediately consumed by Slaanesh.
Oh shit! Jesus Christ!
So, not the people you want to run into in Warhammer are the Dark Eldar. But there was a much worse side effect to this birth of Slaanesh, and that was the dominance of demons in the warp. These new creatures started showing up that were under the control of the four Chaos Gods, and many human planets began seeing massive births of warp-connected humans called Psykers all throughout space. It wasn't just like on Earth where most of these people were the navigators were before. Now Psykers are showing up everywhere. And these people would be persecuted as witches on the more savage worlds, but on the more populated, modern worlds, they would be seen as heralds of the new age of man, like an evolved form of humans, and they would usually be leaders or politicians or, upper class people. Before long, demons would start to take control of weak-willed Psykers from the warp, because that's how they had their powers, and would use them as access to the physical world. And as we mentioned, many of them were leaders and higher members of society. So this led to all the advanced human worlds falling to chaos. The only world,
This didn't take long.
The only worlds that survived were those who were savage enough to kill and burn Psykers as witches.
That's so fucking fucked up.
Yeah. So that's who took.
I mean, I guess it's a good thing, but
yeah. So they were able to survive because they were They were demons who were taking over. Who were able to be taken over by demons, at least.
I like that's such a great writing prompt. It's just like, yeah, but what if the paranoid religious people are right for once?
Yeah, that kind of happened. But we talked about all this. But what was happening on Earth this whole time?
A big old orgy.
So no, not at all. Well, maybe, but not concentrated. If so, its name had been changed to Terra by people basically at this point, so it's called Terra, and it was surrounded now by massive warp storms, which cut off the Sol system from their other worlds.
Wow.
And basically, this happened to every planet out there. Every human planet now, because of the birth of Slaanesh, there was so many just like giant storms in space that warp travel was impossible. Like, you would go into the warp and just explode.
Earth is hard.
It's impossible at this time. Literally impossible. So everyone on all these human planets were now once again completely isolated.
Huh. That's a bummer.
But this led to the mass isolation of Earth for the first time in ages, and it lasted for thousands of years. Control of the Sol system shifted between Terra and Mars during the first half of the Age of Strife. But by the 28th millennium, almost all traces of advanced technological civilization on Earth, or Terra, were long gone after thousands of years of war.
Oh.
And the planet had become an entire desert wasteland, ruled by techno-barbarians who battled each other over scraps of ancient human interstellar tech they could find. We don't know, anything about this time. There's a couple, nation names, a couple, leader names, but it's all irrelevant.
That's depressing.
Mars had a very different transformation. Mars would see the planet's terraformed ecosystem become destroyed and kind of revert back to the red planet. And the war between Psykers, there was a war between Psykers on Mars and a group known as the Mechanicum, which was an ancient group of the most advanced people of human technology. And the Mechanicum would end up winning out against the Psykers, and they became known as Tech Priests.
Okay.
And this slowly unified.
We call them IT people.
It's worse than that. They slowly unified Mars beneath their theocratic rule of their cult, known as the Cult Mechanicus, as they worshipped a creature known as the Machine God, which is extremely vague and complicated religion that we don't really understand in full detail. But they believe that all machines have a spirit, and they worship and bless them to make them work.
I think my computer has its own little personality.
Well, put a seal on it and maybe it'll work better. The Machine God is very likely the Void Dragon that was buried on Mars, but it's not known for sure.
Oh, yeah.
The Tech Priests would even visit Terra during this time and look at it and then just be like, well, this is lost. And they just went back to Mars.
Oh, fuck this place. That's so sad, being like, this is where we were from, and now it's just a shithole.
Yeah, so Mars became the beacon of humanity during this time, and they would begin to study and master lulls in warp storms, which was able to let them kind of send out communication bursts into space, and even try to regain some of their lost technology on Mars. They would wait over 1,000 years for a lull in the storms and send out an expedition. And these expeditions would have entire Titan legions with them. Units of tech priests who would field the Titans, which were the largest combat walkers of all time. Basically think like 6 Empire State Buildings on top of each other. And they would be capable of horrific acts of mass destruction, as well as carrying thousands of workers inside of them, including millions of servitors, who the Mechanicus became very good at making.
Right.
Most of these expeditions would never be seen again, either lost in the warp or later found dead on worlds, usually due to orcs. Others, however, would succeed and create what is known today as Forge Worlds. If you play Warhammer Darktide, that is a Forge World. These are entire planets turned into massive factories, usually using the core of the world itself as its power source, which were industrial replicas of Mars. And they would attempt to send messages back to Mars, and some broken transmissions would get received, but they would not be reunited for many years, each having to develop their own cultures and their own spins on the religion of the cult Mechanicus.
Oh, jeez.
Back on Terra, an extremely powerful Perpetual, using his psychic powers, knew the birth of Slaanesh was coming. And of course, this is none other than the Emperor of Mankind. And he would decide that he could no longer rule from the shadows, as things were getting too bad.
Yeah, it took him that long, huh?
Yeah, so what he did during this time is he knew this was going to happen, so he let it happen, because he couldn't stop it. So he let it happen. And he went underneath the Himalayan mountains and created, because again, remember how old he is. This is probably the richest person in the universe. He has an infinite money and knowledge. He is the smartest person ever, the strongest person ever, and the most powerful psychic ever. And he went...
Okay, I get the propaganda.
Yeah, he went under the... It's true, unfortunately. But he went underneath the Himalayas and created massive gene labs. And he would learn to manipulate the human genetic code like never before. And the Emperor came to the surface and began to recruit the techno-barbarians through either charisma or might, and find the ones who were good, like good guys, like good people. And he would take this army down to underneath his labs and begin to change their genetic code, turning them into a group of super soldiers known as Thunder Warriors.
That's pretty sick, not gonna lie.
Yeah, they're very, very Mad Max, everything about this. Techno-barbarians.
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing this entire time.
Oh, they literally 100% have said the art of this time is based off of Mad Max. So that's accurate. That's just what it is. So Thunder Warriors were bigger, stronger, and faster and smarter than humans, which let them able to conquer Terra pretty quickly, and even the satellite moon of Luna.
Hey,
during this time, it's called the Unification Wars. He began experimenting on cloning his own DNA as a template. And this would become known as the Primarch Project. The Emperor would craft 20 individual superhuman genomes using his own arcane perpetual code as the base. He would start with a sample...
This is going to backfire.
Maybe. He would start as a sample with a sample of his own DNA, and then further differentiate it into 20 genomes to make them individuals and not clones. The gestation pods of the Primarchs, as they were called, was made, and he sealed them with magical glyphs that he learned, likely from Eldar during his times traveling space, which made them immune to the warp. But somehow, the Nasty Four knew he was doing this, saw this as a threat, and opened up a warp gate in the Primarch gestation chamber.
Jesus.
And they speared it away. Either, well, it says they themselves. I don't know if the gods, like fucking Korn, showed up in person, just grabbed a couple of them, and threw them into the warp. They literally just chucked them out into the warp. Now,
nope. Whoop.
Now it's a good thing he sealed them against warp magic, because they would be untouched by the warp. It did not affect them. They were invincible in the warp. But what did happen is they would get ejected out at different human colony planets that had been long lost throughout the entire galaxy.
Oh. That's cool. That's such a fun story. I mean, I bet it doesn't go well all the time, but
it might. So this was a huge setback for the Emperor, because he planned on using these children as generals to lead his Thunder Warrior army out from Terra into different planets. So without them, his plans started to fall apart. But he's nothing if not crafty, and he decided he needed to give mankind an even greater advantage than they already had in the Sol System. Because when they leave the Sol System, because he had been out in space. He had seen things like orcs. He knew what Eldar were. He knew what orcs were. He knew there was dangerous things. So he would move forward without the Primarchs, working with his new Empire of Man, as he called it, and their group, the Imperial Biotechnological Division, which had a sample of each of these 20 Primarchs. They had some of their DNA.
Oh.
And he then used these to craft what is known as the first gene seeds. These are stem cell zygotes that could be implanted into a living human being, allowing them to be radically changed physically and mentally to take on the traits of that Primarch who they were based off of, whose gene it was.
Dude, somebody really paid attention in biology.
So that was his, biotechnology is like the Emperor's, like that's his method of taking over. And so this would eventually get perfected, and these new creatures that were born out of this, it was about a 1 in 20% chance you would survive it, and you already had to be like a perfect person, like perfect health person to even go into it.
Right.
And they would be known as the Emperor's Angels, technically called the Astartes, commonly called the Space Marines.
Oh, yeah, big guys.
Yeah. So he now has his original stock of Astartes, the strongest and bravest human warriors, who would found the original military force of the Emperor, who he would send out into the galaxy under his own leadership. And they were extremely reliable and loyal to the Emperor to a fault, seeing him as like a grandfather.
Oh, yeah. For the Emperor.
While they are not as powerful as the Primarchs by any means, they were able to be mass-produced, and soon he gathered his Thunder Warriors and had the Astartes kill them all, as they were seen as unpure, immoral, and savage techno-barbarians from the previous age.
That's... man...
So he didn't want to risk them being wild barbarians still, so he just eliminated them from existence. There is, allegedly, some who survived and are still out there to this day.
Well, well, God bless him. I hope.
Yeah, there's a couple Thunder Warrior characters who pop up in books and stuff. So there was a second group of subspecies he made at this time, super soldiers, called the Custodes. And these would be his personal elite guard. This is all we're going to talk about them for the whole time. But so the gene seeds that were made for the Space Marines are each of these 20 kids he made, right? The Custodes are about like 5 feet taller than Space Marines, stronger, smarter, faster, and the reason why is their gene seeds of the Emperor's personal DNA.
Oh, okay.
So he has his own like clone soldiers who guard him at all costs. And now we go
and they're fucking beefy boys.
They're thick. And we're gonna.
Is the Emperor large, or is he just a normal person?
Massive.
Yeah.
So now we're going to part 4, the Great Crusade.
Oh boy.
Emps and his fleet of super soldiers who would die for him soon arrive on Mars. The Martians, who were seen as a major threat at this time, even with the Astartes and the advancements of the Mechanicum, are believed to have been superior to them. But thankfully, no blood was spilled as they just agreed to join with the Emperor, signing a thing called the Treaty of Mars. The Cult Mechanicus would be renamed as the Adeptus Mechanicus, as they are known today, or the Admech, and would become aligned with the Empire, and were able to continue their worship of the machine god if they supplied weapons for the Empire. This was a there was a very
religious freedom.
Yeah. So there was a weird side effect to this, because it turns out this was a prophecy the Cult Mechanicus had, and the Emperor was seen as their Messiah, and will be renamed by the Cult Mechanicus as the Omnissiah.
Oh.
This is basically like they see him as Jesus, is a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting the vibe.
So, it was in their prophecy that a powerful psychic and someone who was smarter with science and technology than any of them were would show up. And he did. So he's the Omnissiah, a figure prophesied by their faith. They worshipped the machine god. Now there's the Omnissiah, aka Emperor, aka their version of Jesus, and this would lead the Admech to fully dedicate themselves to his cause, uniting humanity amongst the stars, which was his cause. And they would serve faithfully as the purveyors of science and technology in exchange. There was an asterisk in exchange for any archaeotech that was found. This means technology from the previous ages. The flag of this new empire, which used to be a eagle holding a thunderbolt, was changed to that of the Aquila, a double-headed eagle, which symbolizes the union of Earth and Mars, with one eye open to the right, showing that they only look forward and they ignore the past. So with the AdMech on board, they were able to make the first suits of power armor that we know so well of the Space Marines. And they would even make their own knights that we talked about before, and titans from the Forges of Mars, that would leave with the Emperor now that the warp storms had started to clear up, as they would start to travel through the rest of space in their ships and their 20 Space Marine legions, which were fit for battle. But they were missing their leaders, the Primarchs. So we had 20 legions of generalist soldiers. So they were being commanded by normal humans, which they didn't like, and the Emperor didn't like.
Gross.
So
right?
Yeah, but there was also, just for the record, millions of humans in this army as well. It wasn't just Space Marines. There was tons of what we now know as like the Imperial Guard or the Astra Militarum. Just normal human soldiers were there. So Emps soon began to his reconquest of the galaxy, leading them from Mars and the Sol system to their old worlds they had on charts. But due to the reuse of the gene seeds, they found it was starting to take years to make a single Astartes. Like, to make more, the gene seeds are being too recycled.
Yeah, you gotta get something pure.
They need to get something from the source. And luckily, this was remedied, because soon, upon discovering the former colony world of Chthoniya, which was kind of medieval at this time, which was a planet not far from Terra, the Emperor was reunited with his first lost son, the Primarch Horus.
How'd that go?
Horus was a child at this time, which was great, because the Emperor took him under his wing. They shared a very unique bond as father and son. They both cared deeply for each other. It is known that they would fight side by side often, saving each other multiple times. They also revealed that Primarchs were about as strong as 1 million Space Marines. So these things were extremely dangerous. And Horus would lead his legion, called the Luna Wolves, who were able to make more Space Marines faster now, taking only about a day to turn someone into a Space Marine. Because they now have a direct gene seed donor. 30 years after that, they would find the planet of Fenris, where they would discover the second lost Primarch, Leman Russ. This is a frozen world which he had grown up in, which is basically a savage society based entirely on Vikings. Nice. He didn't believe the Emperor who he was at first. He didn't believe he was his real dad and stuff like that, until they had a drinking competition where Leman Russ lost the drinking competition, which was impossible. So clearly he had to be right. So that was the second son got on board. Now, yeah, go on.
Do all these sons, did they conquer these worlds and become the leaders of them all?
So Horus was 8 years old when he was found. So Horus, no.
So okay.
Fenris, Leman Russ on Fenris was basically the leader of their warrior society.
Okay, so he was all right. So he's basically just collecting people in colonies again.
Yeah, and all these people who were under him were now all their soldiers from these planets were now able to be turned into Astartes, all their generals that he ruled, right?
Right.
So Horus loved having a brother, but he hated having to share the Emperor's attention.
Oh boy. He
really wanted to remain the favorite son. So soon the Emperor would unite with all his sons. This could be an entire 5-episode series itself. So what I'm going to do is go through them all and who they were, what legion they are, and what their names are. So first, of course, we had Horus of the 16th Legion, the Luna Wolves. Then we had Fenris of the 6th Legion, the Space Wolves. And then the Primarch of the 2nd Legion was found, which is redacted entirely. Completely unknown. Nothing about that one. So next, we have the Primarch of the 10th Legion, named Ferrus Manus, of the Iron Hands. Next, we have the 3rd Legion's Primarch Fulgrim, who would lead the Emperor's Children. Next was the fan favorite Vulcan of the Salamanders of the 18th Legion. Then we had Rogel Dorn, leading the 7th Legion of the Imperial Fists, the other fan favorite character. Next, we have the most controversial lover-hate character of all of Warhammer, Robbie Gilliman, also known as Robbie G by the fans, the leader of the
Robbie G, baby.
the 19th Legion. Sorry. I think that is? Oh, no. Sorry, the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, which are to this day the poster boys of Warhammer 40,000, those blue Marines.
Oh.
Then we had Magnus the Red, who, yes, he did have red skin due to the proximity of the warp of the planet he was born on. A leader of the 15th Legion called the Thousand Sons, and then the beautiful blonde-haired, literally angel-winged son, Sanguinus of the 9th Legion, Blood Angels.
Badass name for him.
Next, we have my favorite loyalist, who I play in my Space Marines, Lionel Johnson of the 1st Legion's Dark Angels. Next up is the 4th Legion's Pertrabo, Iron Warriors. Then we have Mortarion of the 14th Legion, another big fan favorite of the Death Guard. Then we have Lorgar of the 17th Legion's Word Bearers. Then we have Jagtai Khan, who I bet you can guess what they're themed after, of the White Scars 5th Legion. Then we have Conrad Kurz, a.k.a. Batman, of the 9th Legion's... the 8th Legion's Night Lords. And then we have the 12th Legion's Primarch Angron, which literally means Angry Man, of the World Eaters. Next, we have Corvus Corax of the 19th Legion, the Raven Guard. And then we have the 11th Legion, which is redacted. And then we have one, or should I say two, of the 20th Legion, Alpharis and Omegon, the twin Primarchs of the Alpha Legion.
Good gracious. That's
the cast. Each one of those guys has their own book series. They have their own entire stories of how they're found. Everything about their entire lives is known, and we're not going to talk about it. Going on forward with the return of all the Primarchs leading their legions, they were now seen as fathers and brothers by the Astartes under them, and they were the goal to achieve. They were perfect. They all were these massive godlike characters, and everyone and all the Astartes strained to be like them. And this was the height of the Great Crusades. So for thousands of years, for thousands of planets that were taken out, that are being settled during this time, or being rediscovered and brought into the Empire this time, it soon became hundreds of thousands. And they would fall into what is known as the Imperial Compliance, under the might of the legions of the Space Marines. The Primarchs were seen as gods from ancient legends, but they were still men and had many flaws, as we all do. Many were jealous of each other, they were competing for Daddy's favor, and would hold grudges against each other, and even hold grudges against the Emperor. And this wasn't helped by the Emperor clearly choosing favorites, being Sanguinus, his blonde-haired angel child, and Horus. Angron, one of the guys we mentioned, had a problem. He had many problems, but he had one big problem, which was he had giant nails in his brain. And this was from growing up on his world, which was ruled by blood sports. And he was basically a gladiator. And as you can imagine, being a Primarch, he was the best gladiator. And what these spikes in his brain would do is trigger his brain to throw him into fits of uncontrollable rage, and the Emperor wanted these to be removed.
Oh, well, that's no fun for him.
Yeah, he didn't want him to be in crazy fits of rage. He wanted to take these out, but it turned out it would be fatal to take him out. And so he tried to work with the AdMech, one of the AdMech's most famed leaders, a techno-archaeologist named Arkin Land. And during this time, he would find it be too dangerous to remove them. But there's an important reason I bring this up, because during this encounter, the Emperor confessed to Land that he had no love for any of the Primarchs, seeing them only as tools to enact the Imperial will.
Oof, big Fs.
When asked by Land, then why do you let them call you father, he responded by reciting the tale of Pinocchio, saying it's natural for creations to call their creator's father.
Well, I appreciate the reference.
So, that's just to give a little bit of character to the Emperor and see how he sees these things. How real is that? I don't think it's very true. I think he did definitely like Horus and Sanguinus. The other ones, maybe not as much, but he definitely had two favorites. Right. Space Marines ramped production up, taking only about a year to make one Astartes on average now, but this still had side effects. They were starting to be made way too similar to their Primarch, having their personality defects being the same, if not emphasized greater, by their minds pre-upgrade.
Oh, okay.
And this would prove soon to be very bad. The Great Crusade would end after 300 years on the conquest of a world called Ulanor, a massive war which the Emperor claimed to be the greatest victory of the Imperium because they managed to hold on to a lot of old technology. What the Emperor did after this was give all credit of victory to his son Horus, which he then titled the War Master, and then he decided, I'm going to go back to Earth, and you're going to be in charge of the Crusade now. I have stuff to do back home, you're now leading the Crusade. So Horus was now the leader of the expeditionary fleets, and things seemed to be going pretty well, but unknown to our boy Emps, the seeds for his empire's destruction were already fully sown. Because his son Lorgar, the leader of the Word Bearers, had fallen into the service of the dark gods of chaos. This happened 160 years into the Great Crusade. Seeking the source of... so he began to believe the Emperor was the god. He started telling people the Emperor was a god to be worshipped because there's no other explanation for it. Like, it has to be the truth. That's what he thought. So he started telling people that. So all the Word-Bearer Space Marines started believing that he was a god, and they spread the word that the Word-Bearers. So, they started turning planets into this cult to believe the Emperor was a god. The Emperor hated this, found Lorgar, and beat the living shit out of him, to the point of him almost being dead, saying, I'm not a god, I am a man. And that was actually one of the imperial tenets at the time, was that he is not a god, he's a man like us.
Right.
So, if Lorgar said, well, if you're not a god, who is? And then he found this giant tear in reality called the Eye of Terror, and went inside of it.
Yeah. Oh, so they're gods.
So he found Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, and they proved worthy of his worship, and he devoted himself to all four, seeing their vision of the warp combining with real space as a future worth fighting for.
Oh, wow.
Lorgar arranged for the War Master Horus to visit the barbarous planet of Davin, not long after his victory on Ulanor, and there he arranged for Horus to be mortally wounded by a weapon blessed by Nurgle, a pox spear with a pox so potent the Primarch body could not resist its disease. His own Astartes, in an effort to save him, handed him over to a Davinite chaos cult known as the Temple of the Serpent Lodge. Keep in mind, they don't know what chaos is at this time.
Right.
Where Lorgar and his first chaplain, Erebus, did a chaos ritual to Horus's spirit, where it ejected him out of his body and sent him to the warp, right in front of the four chaos gods.
Oh, great.
The chaos gods said, we're going to spare your life and bring you back if you choose to become our servant and overthrow the Emperor of mankind. Horus loved the Emperor, so he's like, fuck you. No, I'm not going to betray my dad. So the chaos manipulated on his insecurities about how much Sanguinius was liked more than him, and other things like that, to where eventually, after hours and hours of mental torture, he succumbed to the chaos gods and was returned to his body a fully corrupted champion of chaos.
Yikes.
And now we're on to part 5, which is the end of our episode today, the Horus Heresy. Horus began splitting his legion. It is right after this happened. He wakes up, starts talking to his people about this, kind of. Not really telling them everything that's going on. And he finds out who's too loyal to the Emperor and who's not, which is basically half and half of his legion, and throws them into civil war between those loyal to the Emperor and those loyal to him. Those who stood by him would remove the mantle of Lunar Wolf, taking up a new legion called the Sons of Horus. The Loyalists were completely destroyed, and Horus, in control of the entire military, remind you, began positioning the army for a grand rebellion where he would claim the throne and become the next emperor.
Oh boy.
By manipulating his brothers alongside Lorgar, as well as a host of new demons he had, he was able to convert 8 of his brothers to his side. Angron of the World Eaters devoted himself to Khorne. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children devoted himself to Slaanesh. Mortarion of the Death Guard devoted himself to Nurgle. And Magnus of the Thousand Sons devoted himself to Tzeentch, while Conrad of the Night Lords and Alferus and Omegas of the Alpha Legion, as well as Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, became devoted to all 4. And another
Chaos Undivided.
Yeah, Chaos Undivided for those guys. And, of course, Sons of Horus. Another ally came in the form of Kelber Hall, who was the leader of the Martians Mechanicum itself. And he turned multiple Night Houses and Titan Legions to Chaos. By the 31st millennium, half the Empire's army, almost 50-50, had turned to Chaos, and many regiments of the Imperial Army, 9 Chaos Space Marines, Titan and Night Houses at the core of to which a core of tech priests, now calling themselves the Dark Mechanicum, all joined Horus. The coming civil war would bring ruin across the entire Imperium, and it started with what is known as the Isstvan III atrocity, one of the most advanced Imperial worlds at the time. Horus gathered all the planet's population on the surface and ordered all the loyalist space marines to gather there for a speech for him. And he dropped virus bombs on the entire planet,
Yikes.
killing the entire population. But fortunately, the loyalists were warned of Horus's betrayal.
Oh.
And they avoided the planet, but the planet was still wiped out of all life. Horus then laid in wait for retribution of the loyalists, knowing they were coming on the neighboring world of Isstvan V, where the loyalists showed up with every other legion. So 19 verse 1 right now showed up, basically. Or I guess it's 18. 18 verse 1 showed up because 2 were never made. But they underestimated Horus because they didn't know that 7 of these legions that showed up with them were already chaos corrupted, and immediately turned on them in an event known as the Drop Site Massacre, where as soon as many of the loyalists landed, their brothers just betrayed them and started slaughtering them.
Yikes.
This gained enough momentum with Horus to push towards Terra itself, and for 7 years he would push through the galaxy to the heart of the Imperium, killing trillions of humans across the galaxy, culminating in the 31st millennia in the massive assault of the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra. This is also its own minigame called Warhammer Horus Heresy. There's an entire, you could be all these different traders and all this different stuff. There is 1,000 fucking books. That's an exaggeration, but there is literally 100 books about this whole war. It is a huge fucking deal. After 55 days of nonstop fighting, the Emperor of Mankind boarded Horus's flagship that was bombing the planet, called the Vengeful Spirit, alongside his son and Horus's brother Sanguinus. Sanguinus would become separated, and he would encounter Horus on his own. Horus offered one last chance to Sanguinus to join the ruinous powers, but he refused and a duel broke out. But with the might of the Four, Horus was way stronger than any other Primarch and destroyed Sanguinus, who he made sure had the most painful death he could muster.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The psychic assault against Sanguinus was so powerful that it echoed through not only space and the warp, but time, and it is still felt by Blood Angels to this day.
Yikes.
What Sanguinus' sacrifice did was buy enough time for the Emperor to reach the Archtrader's domain and come upon the bloody body of Sanguinus being stood over by Horus. This is a famous art thing, too. There's an image of Horus standing over bloody Sanguinus' body. The final duel between Horus and the Emperor of Mankind began, and while Emps is all-powerful, Horus had been granted chosen status by all four gods, warping him into a massive figure matching the might of the Emperor. The battle ended with a great psychic blow from the Emperor, which crippled Horus and knocked the might of the Dark Gods out of him, allowing Horus, for the first time in all these years, to see clearly, without any corruption. With immense sorrow, the Emperor decided it was too late, and did in fact care for his Primarchs as he shed a tear, as he obliterated Horus's soul so it could never be resurrected in the warp as a demon. The Emperor, however, was spilling a little bit because the Horus, with his weapon made of Fulgurite enchanted chaos claws called the Talons of Horus, disemboweled the Emperor.
Oh.
So the Emperor wasn't doing too good and had to be carried back to Terra, while the remaining Chaos forces scrambled and fled back to their worlds, which were living inside the warp, and the remaining traitor legions ran into the Eye of Terror. The Emperor, at his own direction, had himself installed into a cybernetic life support mechanism and psychic amplifier known as the Golden Throne, where he remains today. This allowed his mind to anchor itself in real space, making him able to fight off the powers of the Chaos Gods and the Warp, and direct the Astronomicon, which is a psychic beacon that is the lifeblood of the Imperium's communication and interstellar travel. Think like a psychic GPS for navigators in the Warp
Right.
to get through it, that is kept going only by the Emperor's living mind. The last will of the Emperor was to declare the traitor legions to be chased into the Warp, and all records and memory of them expunged from the archives of man. Primarch Roboot Gilliman, aka Robbie G, of the Ultramarines, would crown himself Imperial Regent and Lord Commander of the Imperium.
Yo, Robbie G got it. Hell
He's
yeah,
a good dude. He's not a villain. He's a good character. He's one of the few good guys. Little bit too into the code, but he does not believe the Emperor is a god, so there's that.
That's good.
So that's the end of the Horus Heresy and where I'm ending today's episode, and this is about the 31st millennia, so there's 9 more millennia so you catch up to 40k. But now you can understand where this all went wrong and how it's a galaxy-wide apocalypse.
Right. And that's kind of like where we're fighting in like the aftermath of all these wars.
Yeah,
basically.
even though it's been 9,000 years, they haven't been able to recover. So these planets are all like these wastelands from the Horus Heresy, or even the cybernetic revolution, or the Age of Strife, all that crazy shit. And there is one little postscript thing to mention about the Horus Heresy: is at the end there was one final battle, like while they were the chaos were running away, on a planet called Sotha, which was home to an ancient Necron warp beacon known as Pharos. So this Necron beacon became active, which did 2 things. One, it started sending signals to Tomb Worlds to wake up.
Uh-oh.
And 2, it caused such a powerful beat in the galaxy that it grew the attention of a creature living in dark space called the Tyranid Hive Mind, that now slowly began to move towards the Milky Way.
Oh, damn. Okay, that fucking sucks.
So 2 galaxy-ending threats basically got alerted at once. One being the Necron forces, which would slowly start to wake up over the next 9,000 years. They're not really present yet, but then the Tyranids also would show up in about 9,000 years, basically being space parasite things that just want to eat everything in their path as a hive mind.
That's not good.
If
Yeah,
you know,
no, I'm not a big
if you
fan
know
of hive minds.
StarCraft and the Zerg, they're directly based off the Tyranids from Warhammer 40,000.
That's cool. It's kind of cool to hear about the people coming back from the tombs. The Necrons, they're coming back. That's kind of
Yeah, not great guys, really. Kind of want to exterminate
but
all
it's
life,
like,
but they're there.
but they've been there dormant for a long. They're like the Reapers
Yeah.
in Mass Effect. They just laid dormant until it was time.
Basically, they're now starting to wake
to
up.
come. Now they're
And then,
they're gonna come.
also during this time, it's basically the Eldar had their own apocalypse, so they're almost extinct. The Dark Eldar are hiding in the webway, poking out only when they need to. Orcs are running rampant through the galaxy. The Tau don't exist yet; they're still animals at this point on their home planet. Who else is a faction in Warhammer? That's basically, I guess, it as far as they go. There's other aliens out there. There's tons of different weird alien species out there, but they're just kind of not relevant, or at least not yet. Also, during this time, and like when everyone now after post Horus Heresy, other forms of mutants start to show up, like Ogrins.
Oh.
Start to evolve. Or I guess it happened kind of during the Age of Strife, like right before this, before the Horus Heresy, when they were reuniting all these planets. They found human worlds with ogres instead of humans living on them, because the conditions of the world like vastly changed their biology to survive.
Right.
So you got
I like that.
you
though.
got things like
I mean, it's
Ogrins
just like
and
they go to a planet expecting to see regular people, and they're like, "Hello,
yeah.
what you doing down there?"
Yeah, so
What
basically
the fuck?
that, their Ogrins are a big one, Ratlings are another big one, which are halflings in the 40k universe. Couple other ones, Squats, aka Dwarves.
Squats.
So they're around. Yeah, that's the end of Warhammer 40,000 Part 1.
Well, all right.
So,
That's fantastic.
yeah, the Horus Heresy is over, and the next is the actual Warhammer 40,000 universe forming. And how did it get to become a giant cult? We'll find out next time.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think that the Emperor is a good guy. I've not heard that he's a good guy, but it's like all these stories, it doesn't make him sound that bad. He's like, he doesn't want to be known as a god. He wants to like try to keep balance with everybody and yada yada.
Yeah.
But yet, I know him as a scumbag.
Well, you know what people say about him, basically.
Right.
He's it's just he's a real person, you know. Now, the big thing is he alive? That's what you got to ask yourself. Is the Emperor still alive?
Right. He was gored by his son.
Now, one of the things that Chaos like to say a lot when they go into battle is the Emperor's dead. Stuff like that. They'd be like, he's dead, like there's no Emperor, kind of thing. Like, you're all just a bunch of idiots. But at the same time, we have things like the Astronomicon still working, where the humans can travel through space because the Emperor is such a powerful creature. We talked earlier about how the Perpetuals are like impossible to get to kill. So, he's still probably out there. Actually, I have a picture of him. I had a whole bunch of pictures I forgot to put in OBS for this whole thing.
Right.
But I do have one which I can actually throw on right now if you're watching on the live stream, which is the image of the Emperor. Let's see if I can hold this up real quick. How he looks today. Originally, he was just a black-haired, dude. So, I guess I lost.
So how tall is he? Like 20 feet tall or something?
The Emperor?
Yeah, he's like massive, right?
God, how tall is the Emperor? Probably like 8 feet. But he wears power armor,
okay.
so he looks a lot bigger.
So he's like 15 feet tall or some shit.
Yeah, the power armor makes him look massive, and normally he has like flowing black hair. He's kind of dark skinned because he's like an original human.
I've probably seen pictures of him, honestly.
Yeah. So okay, I got the picture. Here is what he looks like now. Make that a little smaller. We'll show a bunch of you in a second. This is him currently entombed in the Golden Throne.
Oh, so he looks dead as shit, though.
Yeah, he's decayed quite a bit.
That's not a good sign.
So, yeah, we'll talk more about the next episode about like what his status is and everything. But that's what you have to look forward to. This is the Emperor. We're going into the probably, despite everything that happened, maybe the darkest turn in the entire galaxy, because now you have things like Space Marines out there, and also most of the Primarchs are dead. Just for the record, during the Horus Heresy,
right?
Dead or lost. Robbie G is the only currently active Primarch. Lehman Russ ran into the warp and was never seen again. People think he's still alive, and they'll bring him back at some point, maybe. Sanguinus got killed. Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, and Magnus the Red, the Chaos, Slanesh, Nurgle, and Tzeentch dedicated legions, they all became demon princes, which means they're now just demons living in the warp, and they can only exist in reality for a short amount of time.
Wow, that sucks.
Horus, it's short amount of time is like probably like a couple like days, but like so they basically live on their own little paradise chaos worlds, just having the fucking time of their life.
And they pop in, do some murdering, pop out.
Yeah, no, they don't though, because no one's really seen only Magnus the Red and Mortarion. Really, no one's seen Fulgrim in fucking like thousands of years. He's kind of he's a giant snake person too now. He's kind of hangs out in his world. Magnus the Red and Mortarion are major characters. The Death Guard, the Nurgle dudes. The Nurgle's a very big deal. So he's out there doing his own thing. I'm trying to think of other Primarchs. Conrad Kurz, the Night Lords guy, who's basically Batman in his story. He was Chaos. He got killed. The Raven Guard guy is missing. Basically, they're all around. Alpha and Omega is a whole fucking joke thing that one of them was probably a loyalist and one of them was Chaos, and they both knew that about each other and decided to just do their own thing. It's complicated. A lot of crazy shit like that goes down. Horus is dead, obviously. We'll talk more about that next time, because his surviving legion also, to end this, they ran to the warp. They ran to the Eye of Terror, all the Sons of Horus, changed their name again to Black Legion.
Oh, okay.
And they're the poster child Chaos Space Marines, who I play in the miniature game of the black and gold Chaos Space Marines. So, yeah, that's the end of today's episode. I'm going to wrap it up here.
Well, all right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.